Esther Sarah Bas Chaya Pesel Dov Mordechai ben Beila Sheva Elisheva Shena Bas Dina Edel Adara Sarah Bas Pesilea Liora Galia Bas Sarah Fegalea Bas Chana. And someone sent me two things yesterday.
I sent you.
Yeah, I didn't write them down yet.
Dr. Pearl, what's wrong?
You sent it to me, Rabbi. You sent it to me personally.
He's been sick for a while. He's worse.
Yeah. Arya Yaakov ben Rusipora, Yechiel Meir ben Bela. They should all be Shlema. Also, Yeshua Bekar for Shlamis. Chana Leah Bas Rachel, Shalom ben Ma'al Karoza, Gelachana Bas Fegalea, and of course, today's learning is also being learned. Leila Nishmas, Yitzchak Moshe ben Yehoshua Akayin, with Daniel Arya ben Yitzchak Moshe Akayin, with Victor ben Aaron Lazar, Eva Shlomit Bas Chaim. All of the neshamas should have an aliyah. Okay.
Amen.
Today we're learning Daf Chaf Hey in Masechta Yevamos. If we get aggressive, we can finish the parak today, but we won't. The goal would try to be to get to at least this Mishnah. If this may be this Mishnah, well, we'll see. We'll see how fast we get. We're holding on Chaf Dalet Amud Beis in the bottom, a couple of lines in the bottom. We were in the middle of a discussion. The discussion we were in the middle of having was a machlek, not a machlek. So we had a Mishnah. The Mishnah at the top of the daf was talking about if you have a person as a chashud. What's a chashud? A person who there's a rumor about him that, let's say, Shimon and Rachel were married, and Ruvain, there's a rumor that Ruvain was a little bit a side action with the wife. It seems no proof, no edus. It seems on the surface when you read the Mishnah. The Mishnah said the halacha is that let's say Shimon were to divorce Rachel, and if Shimon divorces Rachel, the halacha is Reuven is not allowed to marry her because we don't want to substantiate the rumor because it'll look like maybe this is the reason why they got divorced because maybe the rumors were true. So in order to not substantiate the rumor, the halacha is don't marry her. It says in the Mishnah that if he does marry her, he's got to divorce her. That's what it says in the Mishnah. The Gemara had explained that Rav was under the impression, Rav was of the opinion that the reason why the Mishnah is true is because we're talking about a case where not rumors and substantiation of rumors, is that rather we have aided to the effect that Reuven was mezana, did have znus with Rachel, and it's because of that the reason why you have to get divorced isn't just because of some fancy pants derabanan halacha. It's because Minat Torah we're saying that she and he were mezana together, and the halacha is that a woman who's mezana, not only is she not allowed to be with her husband, she's also not allowed to be with the person who she cheated with. That's the boil. The boil is also usher. So that's Rav's opinion. So the Gemara had brought kama brises that seemed to be mashma not like that. The brises seemed to be mashma that even without edim, the halacha is going to be that if they get married, we have to make them divorce. Why do they have to get divorced? Because like I said earlier, this substantiation of the rumor is a problem enough that we don't want that substantiation of the rumor to be held in effect. And if he goes against the rabbis and anyways marries her, we're mitzi him like it would be as if it would be an issa deraisa. Okay. So that was the machlekes, not the that was the sheet of Rav. So the Gemara asked all these brises. The Gemara had answered. The Gemara had answered that no, la'olam Rav agrees with the brisa that yes, you'd be mitzi the person even if there'd be no edim. Like the rabbi mentioned, the distinction is whether the woman from the first marriage had kids or not. Meaning, mina Torah, there's no edim. So let's say there's no edim. So then Meker Hadin, once they're married, theoretically speaking, we could leave them. It's not like we're breaking any Torah law if we let them stay married. It's only a derabanan that we're breaking. So the rabbis basically said as follows. They said, if Rachel and Shimon did not have children, then no big deal. Tell them to get divorced. But if they had kids, and now we're going to say that Ruvain has to divorce Rachel after marrying, despite because of the rumor, what it's going to do is that by our paskening that he has to be mitzir, it gives more strength to the rumor, even though the rumor is not halachically binding, and it's going to bring the kids into a scenario where at best there'll be a rumor about them that they're mamzeir. At worst, maybe even in a halacha we could say on some derabanan level that we have to be choshish that maybe they are mamzeir, or at least people are going to think they are. So therefore the Gemara said that's the reason why you can't have it, and Rav agrees to that. Why did Rav not just say that that's pshat in the Mishnah? Because Rav read the Mishnah. The Mishnah is very clear in the end of the Mishnah when it says that Rachel and Shimon got divorced. It didn't say that Shimon divorced her. It said v'hoitzi uhu, that the Bezdin made them get divorced, which implies it was al pi edim. Therefore, Rav said, since it's talking about edim, I have to say it's talking about a case where they had kids. Whereas you're right, in Chanami, if you didn't have kids and it's just a kol, just a rumor, then the halacha would be also Rav's agreement. The Gemara is about to say a second answer to how Rav explains the brisa. The brisa is mashma, you don't need edim in order to force them to have to get divorced. And Rav says the Mishnah is with edim dafka. Says Liboy Seima, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know where are we? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom. The E last word on the line. The E boy is a different answer. How does Rav explain the Mishnah and the Brisa? He'll explain. The Mishnah and the Brisa are arguing. The Mishnah is going to be, let's say, the Chachamim, and the Brisa is going to be the sheet of who? Rebbe. Right? These Mishnah, these Brisas over here that imply that you don't need Eidim, that you'll be moitzi someone from the marriage just based on a rumor. That's the opinion of Rebbe. And La'olam Rav will hold only through Eidim will you be moitzi. Someone to Tanya, what's the Brisa talking about? There's a very interesting Brisa. Roichel Yoitze. Let's say a man comes back from a business trip. He sees the traveling salesman leaving his house on the side door. He's getting in his car and he's leaving. The Isha, and he sees his wife, Fogeres Besinar. She's putting on her undergachkas. Yeah, it looks like she's pulling her skirt up. Yeah, very, very obvious that something was going on over here. He doesn't have proof. There's no edus, but this is what we would say in halacha, raglayim ledavar, the legs to this rumor. This rumor is already not even a rumor. This maybe is even worse than a rumor. He comes home and he sees such a thing. The fact that this is a disgusting thing, the halacha is teitze. He has to divorce him. Rok l'mala min akila. If there is, and the simple translation of the Gemara is if there's saliva or spit on top of the netting that was over the bed. So here, it's not clear exactly what this has to do with tashmish. Rashi says it's mashma that the only way the spit can get there if someone's lying on his back and spit up, and then maybe someone spit. But again, why were people spitting in the middle of tashmish? So the Meiri, in concert with some other Achronim, seem to imply that really the Gemara is not speaking. The Gemara is speaking even in its own way in a Lashon Naki. It says spit. What it really means is zera. It means the semen that someone would have. And really what happened was the man came home. She was not expecting him to come home. And they were cleaning up after their engagement. And there was no time to sort of throw it in the laundry. So she takes the towels or whatever it is that has all of the schmutz on it. And she threw it on top of the bed, maybe somewhere where he wouldn't look. But he happened to see it. So if a man comes home, he sees the guy leaving, and he sees the schmutz in the house, he comes, all of a sudden, Inspector Gadget figures out, my wife is doing stuff on the side, says Rebbe, Third case, Minolam Hafuchim, he sees, this is like the equivalent of like the toilet seat's up. It's like, what's the toilet seat doing up? I was gone for 3 months. Right? Minolam Hafuchim, he sees the shoes under the bed are upside down. Meaning, Tachas Amita, same idea. 1 second. Just look at the shoes. Whose shoes are they? I mean, was the guy walking out barefoot? Like, what's going on here? Just go see whose shoes they are. Like, before you use that case, Gemara says no. Remember, their houses were on dirt. So you could sort of tell if something's going on under the bed. If there's activity going on under the bed, you see clearly someone had shoved their shoes under there. Rashi says that maybe turning them over is a way of hiding the identity, whatever it is. The point is, in all 3 of these cases, you see Rebbe, despite not having Eidim, is going to say that they have to get divorced. Based on what? Just a rumor? Don't get me wrong. If it was me, Chas Shalom, I would completely understand why someone would want to do that. But Rebbe's not saying you have the right to divorce. Rebbe's saying you must divorce her. Why? There's no Eidim. What if he says, no. What if he's one of these types of guys? Maybe like a Will Smith episode, I don't know. He's the type of guy like, I can deal with it. It's fine. It doesn't bother me. No, you got to get divorced. Nothing to talk about. That's the halacha. What do you mean? There's no Eidim. Prove it to me. She says no. Says the Gemara, Rebbe. So says Rav, this shita of the Brisa that says that you can be mitzvah someone without Eidim, who is that? That's the shita of Rebbe. But me, I hold like the Chachamim. And the Chachamim clearly say, Hotzi'uhu. It's talking about Eidim. It's talking about Eidim. Dafka with Eidim, are we going to be mitzvah someone, not on a rumor alone? That's the way the Gemara says it. Says the Gemara after we bring the two different opinions. Okay, Lamaisa, practically speaking, how do we pass it? Hilchasa kavasa the Rav, Hilchasa vas the Rebbe. What does that mean? Rebbe and Rav just explained that I go like the Chachamim, and that the other Bryce are not like me as Rebbe. And says the Gemara, we passing like both. Says the Gemara, kasha hilchasa hilchasa. How can you tell me the halacha is like A and like B? Says the Gemara, like kasha. When are we going to say that the halacha is like Rav? That you require Eidim in order to be mighty someone, dafke bekala the pasuk, when the rumor is a rumor that is not really a strong rumor. It seems to stop quickly after it starts. So it was in people's mouths, and then all of a sudden it seemed to stop going. Over there, that's not strong enough that will be mighty on that type of a rumor. You need Eidim in order to prove that she did something in order to force a get. But whereas when do we paskin like Rebbe, where the halach is going to be that the rumor itself is going to be enough, says the Gemara is bekol delay pasik. This is only when you have a rumor that literally is pretty strong, there's no break. Now, by the way, this should sound familiar. We learned this type of Gemara in Ma'ikatan about a different idea where we talked about a kol of the pasuk and a kol of the lay pasuk. This came up earlier in the, I think it's like Daf Tesvav, Tesayin, somewhere in that range in Moed Cut, and we discussed the idea of when you have a room. I'm trying to remember the context of where we talked about Kol the Pasuk and Kol the Lay Pasuk. I forget.
It says there that Gemara talks about.
But not this specific case. It's not talking about a
Gemara
case.
says that if a person, if the Chashan somebody, if something happens.
Yeah, is that what it is?
I thought so. Unless it's this Gemara.
No, it is. You're right. There was a chshab, and I don't think it was the specific case here. It might have been slightly different. But okay. So either way, says the Gemara. So how call the pasuk, how call the lay pasuk. Says the Gemara, call the lay pasuk. The Gemara explains, call the lay pasuk when there's a very weak call, veleka edim. Then when it's other way around. When it's a strong call and there's no edim, it's kirebi. You rely on a call, and we're going to be mighty them. Call it the pasuk, but if it's a weak call, when it's a weak rumor, then only it's v'ik edim is kirav. So now says the Gemara, just some homework around how do we define what a good rumor and a bad rumor is. Call it the lay pasuk ad kama. How long does a rumor have to be spoken? And nowadays, the news media they swap stories, and tomorrow's what do they call the thing running across the bottom? No, there's a word for it. Whatever. Every 2 seconds is any breaking news. Breaking news. Today's Tuesday. Like everything's a new thing. Yeah. So what's the point in time where we say, okay, it's been going for this long. Now that call, even if it were to stop now, this is called an established rumor. The call delay posagat kama. Amr Abaye says Amr Li'aim. Everyone knows Abaye never met his mother. Abaye's mother died in childbirth, and his father Abaye was a yosef. So whenever this is throughout Shas, Gemara Kedushin says this. Gemara Kedushin says, I forget where in Kedushin. I think it's the fourth parak, but I'm not 100%. Amr Li'aim. Whenever Abaye says that my mother told me, and he says it's a lot throughout Shas. When he ever wants to quote Allah, so he quotes it in his name of his mother. It's not referring to his mother. It's referring to like his nanny. Why? Because he wasn't raised by his mother. He was raised by other people. His father died right after conceiving, and the mother died right after giving birth. Also, just an interesting trivia fact, that's also true, I believe, for Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan also, obviously, had a very difficult life, despite the fact that he was a very beautiful man. In the end of the day, he had a lot of yisurim with his kids and the bone and everything. But he also, his mother died in childbirth, and they were yisaimim. And Rabbi Yochanan was the one, I think, in Kedushin, that's where it was. It's in the second parak, my bad. No, end of the first parak, where it talks about the mitzvah kibbut avim. And it says over there, Rabbi Yochanan says that in a certain sense, he's very fortunate that he wasn't ever forced to have to keep him kind the mitzvah kibbut avim, because it's impossible to truly keep the mitzvah kibbut avim properly. So in a certain sense, there was a chesed of Hashem that for him not to have to ever really meet his mom and dad, so that he should never have to fail in the mitzvah kibbut avim. That Gemara needs a lot of explanation, but on some level you can understand that. Just shows you how important it is to be mechaber our parents, both in life and in death. Very, very important to be mechaber our parents always. Says the Gemara. So what is the true rumor? Says Abaye. I'm quoting now my nanny.
Is it extra mitzvah to mechaber them in death more than the mechaber?
No. It's a continuation of the mitzvah. Says the Gemara. Amrli aim dumi de masa. This is what his nanny, his stepmom, his whatever you want to call it, his adopted mother, dumi de masa, which are like the cheshudim, the suspicious ones of the city. Their rumors is Yuma Upalga, a day and a half. A day and a half is fair. A day and a half is how long we say a rumor needs to be in order to be considered a good rumor that will be mighty without Adam. But of course, that's only if there's no scatter shot. If it's like sort of on and off, that already would be considered. If it's says the Gemara pasuk beini, that is considered a kol of the pasuk. In which case, then it'll only be mighty with Adam.
Only in your town, because over there wasn't much travel.
Yeah, it's a good point. Not clear how a halach like this nowadays with the onset of technology would really play itself out. I mean, nowadays, a rumor again is
goes viral, disappears
in 2 seconds, right? Yeah. So on the one hand, it's much more powerful of a rumor, and on the other hand, it's gone in 2 seconds. Although it's technically available for consumption if you really want to search for it, unless someone deletes their tweets. Yeah. And again, this is all talking only in a scenario where this was not an intimidation factor. If let's say the reason why the rumor stopped isn't because people aren't talking about it, but rather because someone's going around with a baseball bat and says, I hear you forgot all about this rumor, right? If someone's going around with a baseball bat, cracking knees because of that, then the halach is that's not called a real break in the call. That's good. That's a good call. Then we says and therefore it's not considered a break, and therefore even without Eidim will be mitzvah. And even that, when we say that you're going to rely on a koil, this is only a koil about someone who, in general, is not someone who has enemies. If you have a guy who every time he does a business deal, he ends up losing, make another enemy because every time he cheats, he does, he this, whatever it is. Person who has enemies, guess what? Enemies are going to go out of their way to make up stories. So since if the guy has enemies, they might make up stories, you can't really even trust, right? Then you'll only need, then the only way to be moitzed is with Eidim Aval. Ika, oivim hu de afki le lekola. Okay, so fine. So that's the answer in Rav. Rav is going like the Chachamim. Rebbe is arguing, and our Gemara is paskening both like Rav and Rebbe under different circumstances. When there's a good call, don't need Eidim. When there's not a good call, you do need Eidim. Says the Gemara Weiler. It's not awesome. It's a Mishnah in Git, and today's daf is going to be talking about a considerable amount of Git and halachas. Very geschmack stuff. It's not awesome. Says in the Mishnah, Hamoitzi es ishtoi mishum shemra. Very similar type of halacha. Let's say a person's married. Reuven and Rachel are married, and Reuven has some suspicions about his wife. So rumors start abounding that she was mezana with another man. So the halacha, and he divorces her based off of that. So says the Gemara, lo yachzir, he can't return her. Meaning normally the halacha is a man's married, as long as she doesn't go marry someone else in between, he's allowed to marry her again. It says over here, Midrabanan, we're going to say it's also for him to get married. We'll explain in a second. Mishum neder. What about if a man's married and all of a sudden his wife goes and takes upon herself some crazy neder, like, I don't know, I'm never going to cook again. He's like, I can't handle this. And we tried to get it Hatar Sadarim by the rabbi. They couldn't get it done. He says, all right, I'm done. I have no interest in this lady. So therefore, it says over here, lo yachzir. The halach is he's not allowed to be machzir his wife. Rashi speaks out. It's Gemara, maybe. I think it's in a maybe. Could be it's in a different paragraph.
The first case was even if it wasn't true.
Well, we don't know if it's true. It's just a rumor. I mean, there's no.
Right, but let's say they found out it wasn't true. It's allowed to be.
So the Gemara is going to discuss that in a second. So it says like this. Let's say, why did the guy get divorced? He couldn't handle it. Every time he's coming home, he's getting looks from people, comes home, his wife's like, and he looks at her smile, and all he wants to do is just bash her head in with a baseball bat because he knows this woman's been cheating on me. But I can't substantiate it, but, he's looking on, she's always with her phone, quiet, she takes him into the shop. He's like, I feel it, Such a situation, what's the halacha? The halacha is he doesn't have to divorce her, but if he divorces her because of those reasons, we want to make sure, this is the svara that the Gemara explains, we want to make sure that if you divorce your wife for such a reason, that you better make sure that this is the end. Why? Because this is the following concern we have. What if a person, he thinks his wife's cheating, so he divorces her. But then, and she goes and marries someone else, and they have a bunch of kids. And now he finds out that the rumor was not true. So he's going to say, well, if the rumor wasn't true, then I would have never divorced her. And in Hilchas Gittin, that matters. Right? If he can establish like that it was like a mekach toast, that he was only doing it based off of certain assumptions, and it turns out that those assumptions were incorrect. In certain circumstances, we could say that retroactively the get was not a good get, which if not a good get, then that second marriage produced kids who are mamzerim, right? So there's major issues. So we don't want that. And so in order to prevent that, what we do is it's a disincentive process over here. So what we say to him is, hey, buddy, you're going to divorce your wife because of these reasons. You better research them because we're not going to ever let you marry her again. Why? Because we want to remove the incentive.
If you don't allow Machzor Gushasa, then it's not a Mechas person again.
So Machzor Gushasa is a little bit different. Machzor Gushasa is almost always talking about a case where there's if there's another reason why he's getting divorced, they're not together anymore.
Right, but over here, if let's say he changes his mind, even if he can't go back, is the get still a good get?
Well, in a normal case of Machzor Gushasa, it's always going to be a good get. In this case over here, it's because of the concern that he might do that. But if he goes back,
we say that you can't go back because we want this to be final, right? Now, even if he can't go back, let's say he could establish that the rumor was false and it was a mekach tais, is the get still the get?
Not sure. Yeah. And he's saying in practice. Practice, let's say this actually happens.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a problematic get. Meaning,
even if he can't go back to her.
Yeah, because the reason.
What is this fix?
Well, what it fixes is that it's going to force him to make sure he does good research before he. That's really the goal. Really is to make sure that if he's doing, we want to avoid that scenario at all costs. Yes, theoretically speaking, could a guy say, I feel my get was not good, and it's true by neder also. Meaning, if a person's married and his wife took on a neder and he divorced her because of the neder, and he didn't realize I can go to a rabbi, get a hatar sadarim, or he didn't go to the right rabbi, whatever it is, and now all of a sudden, right? He finds out that she went ahead and was mater neder, and all of a sudden he says, "Oh, if I would have known that, I would have never divorced her because of that." So therefore, he might be ma'ira problems on the first get, create mamzerim. So we said, once you divorce your wife for either one of these two things, which again, a raya from here clearly that when you give a get, we don't just say, "Oh, you want to give a get, go ahead." Why are you divorcing her? Meaning, we need to know what the reason is. If the reason is because I don't like the way she makes popcorn, we may not allow you to do that, right? Meaning she has to want to get divorced and you have to want to divorce her, but it has to be for a good reason. Because clearly over here we're factoring in his reasoning. So if it's one of these two reasons, says the Gemara that the halacha is he's not allowed to remarry her. Okay, so let's just take a moment to understand why is the Gemara bringing this in. We had a Mishnah. Our Mishnah said also rumor, different type of rumor. Here we're talking about where the person who is being discussed is the one who the rumor is about. Whereas here we're talking about where the man himself is concerned, his own wife had done something. So there's similarities and differences. But says the Gemara, regardless, what does it say over here? If he finds out that, or he feels that his wife is a rumor that his wife's been cheating, and he divorces her, the halacha is he's not allowed to remarry her. So that's what the Mishnah says. It says the Gemara as follows. Rabbi, tell me, please, what's the halacha? Meaning, in this case over here, we're saying he should not remarry. But let's say he found out that the rumors, maybe not so strong, or he just became okay with it, whatever it is, he wants to remarry her. So he's not allowed to. But what if he did? What if he made Kesef Kedushin? There's only an Issa D'Rabbanan. Do we force them to get divorced or not? So he said, what do you mean? It's our Mishnah. Amar lei, Tanina. It's right in the Mishnah. Hanitan Aleisha says, you have a case where a man is, we're suspicious he was the one who was cheating with a woman while she was married, and she got divorced from the first husband. We say over there that he's not allowed to marry her, but if he does marry her, you see that when he's over on the Issa D'Rabbanan of not marrying this woman, which is predicated on a rumor related to znus, that the halacha is that we must make them get divorced. So wouldn't it be the same thing over here? That a man marries a woman, he hears that she's acting like a zayna, and now all of a sudden he divorces her because of that. So the rabbis say don't marry her, but if he went ahead and married her, we would tell him to get divorced. It's a very opposite case. The Gemara is going to get to it in a second. Correct. Says the Gemara, 3 reasons why this case, the analogy is very weak. Says the Gemara, Amalei, me dummy. I always say whenever the Gemara says me dummy, it's like the Gemara's way of saying, don't be a dummy. Meaning the comparison is so unconnected that it almost, you have to beg the question of what was the Havmina really. Says the Gemara, Amalei, me dummy. 3 reasons. Says the Gemara, first reason. Now it's funny. We're in the middle of Masech Yevamos, and we're bringing a case in Gittin. And really, the question isn't about our Mishnah. The question is, how do we deal with the Gemara and Gittin? So when we say the words Hassam here, Hassam actually means our Mishnah. Hassam there, meaning in our case, where you're trying to prove from, right? Hoitzi uha. It's clear, like Rav told us, it's talking about Edim. So maybe it's min hatayra. The reason why we're mighty that person is because it's al pi Edim. And therefore, v'hacha, whereas in the case of the husband himself, where he's not supposed to remarry her, it's only an Issa D'Rabbanan. So if he went ahead and remarry her, maybe the halacha is over there that he could stay with her. Gemara says no. The Rabba bar Rav Nachman must nisa nami ha'itziatanan. Rabba bar Rav Nachman doesn't learn like Rav. He doesn't darshan or not darshan. He doesn't read the Mishnah that way. He reads the Mishnah as it's talking not like Eitim, like the Gemara, like Rav Sheshis had said in the beginning of yesterday, at the end of yesterday's Gemara, that it's talking about even with that when there's no Eidim and maybe there's no kids, and the halacha is that we're mighty. So why not say that just like it's mighty over there, so too over here? Right? Says the Gemara, no. Still, vakati midami. Reason number 2 why it's a problem. Because hacha ba'al v'hasam ba'al. Because there's 2 different scenarios. Here, in the case of our Mishnah in Yevamos, we're talking about a case where who are we discussing? The person who is the suspicious one. He's the ba'al. He's the one who is sort of substantiating the rumor by going ahead and doing this. So that's a problem. Whereas over here, we're talking about the Baal. The Baal it's a different person. They're both Yisur D'Rabbanan, asked the Gemara, but in the end of the day, it's 2 different people. Gemara says it doesn't matter. I'm like Shapir Dami Adadi. They're still can be compared. Why? Because Hacha Amar Rabbanan Lo Yichnas V'im Kanas Yaitze. In one place, the rabbi said, don't get married, and when you do get married, if you don't listen to us, we're going to tell you have to get divorced. Our Mishnah. So too by the case that we're asking about by Gittin, Amir Rabbanan Lo Yachs. The rabbi said, don't return to your wife, don't remarry her. So the Kanas Yaitze, the halacha should be that you should be mighty. So Gemara says no. And for the final reason, I think this is really what you were bringing up. Hasam in our Mishnah, alume alme lakala. What was the suspicion? That she cheated. By you marrying her, you're substantiating the rumor by marrying her. She was the one who went ahead and went out and then took a spazier with you behind the guy's back. And now all of a sudden, that guy got divorced and magically you showed up. Oh, you seem like such a nice lady. By you marrying her, you're substantiating the rumor. If we allow you to stay together, we're substantiating the rumor. That's going to be the reason why we might see you. Whereas over here, in this case by Gittin, the man is married to a woman. He hears a rumor about his wife.
Can't 7
He divorces her. And now, whatever, he does his own research, says the Gemara, Amrinan Kambe Bekala. He went and looked into the rumor and found out that it was started by one of her petty friends who likes to talk trash about it. Yeah? And it turned out that he felt that the rumor wasn't substantiated, so he remarried her. By remarrying her, he's showing that he's comfortable with her. Therefore, the halacha, although he shouldn't do it, is that if he did do it, we would say that he stays married. Says the Mishnah Vaita, new Mishnah. Very related, but
These missions are nothing to do with Yevamos.
not really. It's really,
so geschmack.
yeah.
So
normal.
All right, we have a Mishnah Chavav. We'll get back to it.
A lot of
We're going to start.
A
Yeah.
lot of Yevamos discusses general marriage.
Yeah.
How much longer we're gonna have this? A couple of
So
days?
only
No.
one more
Tomorrow we're back. Chavav.
No.
Chavav, but it's a short daf. It's a short daf. Chavav, Lamed Beis is a little bit not, a little bit school daf. We'll be all right. Shabbos morning's nice. We'll probably finish before you leave. All the way. Yeah. Says the Gemara, new Mishnah. I maybe get Medina Sayyam. Very quick primer on Masechta Gittin. The first 5 daf discuss a sugya called Befanai Nachtab Uve Befanai Nachtam. Basically, the rule is as follows: when you give a get, the halacha is the get has to be written. It's a shtar. It's a document. It has to be written lishma, l'shem. It has to be a sincere get. So on many levels, it needs to have the right intent. One,
Is it scribed? Is how does it?
Yeah,
I don't know
you
what
go
that
to-
looks like. It's scribed.
it's like it looks like a ksuba.
Like I say, oh really?
Yeah, it's just like you go to a sofer. Usually, they usually have them pre-printed, and you have him write it up. When he's writing it, ideally it should be for you, but you could use a plain document. But when you fill out the names, it has to be written lishma. It has to be the right woman with the right man. I mean, we have to have intent. It can't just be a document that you go over to a guy and he fills it in. No,
What's certain?
yeah, I mean, ideally it should. I mean, it has normal dina shtaris. I mean, it has different. No, not like a sefer Torah, but it's either way. So this it's a piece of paper.
What happens to it afterwards?
You rip it up. I remember they ripped it.
Yeah, I don't know.
They rip it up afterwards.
I remember them ripping it.
You sure about that?
Something.
I think
I'm
the
not
woman wants to hold on to
100%
it.
sure.
You
but I
don't
think I
hold it. The
remember.
woman holds on to it,
Well,
right?
yeah, you give it, it's hers, and Adrab, it's her proof that she's divorced.
Got it.
So she can go get remarried.
I
Understood.
think so.
I
Understood.
think so, unless there's some halachic.
Something I remember about ripping the stones. Maybe I'm wrong.
That's spitting, and that's chalitza. I don't know what you're talking about. No,
but
I'm joking.
I have one, so I remember.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe they're
But I did it with a shliach. Everything was Aydei shliach.
Really?
Yeah.
You're allowed to do that, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, that's our mission we're about to discuss. So the halacha is, I mean, it makes it a little easier, so you don't have
To
to.
deal with it.
Yeah. I did it on the phone. Meaning, I was a man, a shliach in person, and then I spoke to him on the phone, and he was in both. I was
It's
in
like
Florida.
having
He was
power of attorney.
Yeah, basically, it's exactly what it is. And he handled everything for me. Meaning, I told him I want a divorce, and I indicated exactly who she was, and they went through the whole process. They filled out the get, signatures, the whole thing. You need Adim. So okay, so let's go through very, very, very quick 101 Hilchos Gittin. So that get, right? Let's say I can give it to my wife, and she can accept it, but I can also make a shliach to give it, and she can make a shliach to accept it, right? Meaning, which is
No one has to be there.
yeah, that way. A lot of times that's how it's done.
I didn't
But
know.
there needs to be Adis. There needs to be Adis. There needs to be Adis. No. Every time I repeat myself, it's annoying. Yeah, there needs to be Adis on the get because we need to make sure that the shtar, which is stating something, it's stating that Joe is no longer married to Sarah. Marriage is over. Well, just like Kedusha needs Adim, so too Gittin needs Adim. You need Adim, so there's 2 people signed onto the get. Separately, we need to make sure that we know that the man who had the get written wanted it to be given. Meaning, just because I went ahead, you could have a scenario where a person goes, gets a sofa to write a get, gets Adim on the get, and he's not divorced until he hands it to her. So he's not halachically divorced. Let's say he's choshesh, but he's not 100% sure. But he wants to have it in his back pocket. So he could do that. He could write the get. It was all done kosher v'yosher 100%, but he doesn't give it to her. We now need to make sure that if someone shows up giving the get over to the woman, that this was coming from the man, right? Maybe someone ripped into his house, sold the get, and is trying to force the divorce. We need to make sure that it came from him. So you need Adim. It's called Adim Asira. The Adim that saw that he gave the get to this person, or to Adim seeing that he's giving her the get. We need to witness the actual giving over of the get. So now let's say instead of handing it over to the woman, I hand it over to a shliach and say, go take this get and bring it to my wife. Now, if they both live in Woodmere, no big deal. He jumps in his car, he runs over, hands it to her, finished. What happens if she's in Eretz Yisrael and he's in Chutz La'aretz? So here's where this mission is relevant. It's really this isn't the first mission, but it's predicated on the first mission in Gittin. The halacha is that we assume that the Eidim and all of the people involved in creating a get in Eretz Yisrael know of this halacha of needing lishma, and therefore all the job of the shliach is really pretty much just to bring it to the girl. That's really all he's doing. We're not really relying on his words. I mean, he says, yeah, he gave it to me, and we need to know that he gave it to him. But really, in the end of the day, we're not relying on his words too much. Whereas if someone's coming from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, now we have to be concerned that this is this Gemara's assumption that in Eretz Yisrael people know about the halacha of lishma, and the Chutz La'aretz they don't know, and therefore they instituted a requirement that when the person comes, he has to say the words "Befanai nechtav," in front of me this was written. Befanai nechtav, and in front of me it was signed. It's an additional layer of edus. It's an eid echad. He's a witness. He's a one witness, whereas normally we need two. Here, one's going to be sufficient. This edus is effectively saying, don't be concerned about the lishma nature of this get. It is lishma. I was there. I saw it written. I saw the sofer. I saw the edim. I saw the whole story. It was written and signed in front of me. Here's the get. Mazel tov, be divorced. That's the rule of gittin when it comes to giving a get by a shliach. So now, with that in mind, we now have to ask ourselves, this guy who's coming from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, a lot relies on his word. Meaning, the guy who's divorcing Reuven might live in Alexandria, Egypt, and this woman is sitting in the old city in Yerushalayim, and she's getting a get. Now, let's say the shliach happens to be someone who likes the wife, so he could he's friends with how does he know her? Maybe they had dinner once, whatever. He's by his friend's house. He's rummaging through his house, finds the get that the guy wrote. Takes the get, rolls it up, and he runs out. Heads over to Yerushalayim, says over to Rachel, "Hey Rachel, what's going on? Guess what? Reuven's done with you. Here's your get. We can be together now." So says the Gemara, says this Mishnah, since so much is relied upon his word, he's immediately someone very similar halach to what I've been discussing that already contains within him some suspicion. It's not that we're choshesh he's lying, but in order to disincentivize someone to go do this, we're not going to allow the person who is the shliach. Now again, if a person wants to be a scumbag, he's got to rope someone else in. Hey, do me a favor, go take the get, bring it to this lady, and then I can marry her. Okay, that far we're not choshesh, but that someone himself is going to go do this, that maybe we would be choshesh. So says the Mishnah, I may be getting Medina Sayyam. You have a shliach, we'll call him Joe. Joe is bringing the get from Medina Sayyam, and he does everything he's supposed to establish the get. So the halacha is she's divorced. Says the Mishnah, Lo Yisa es Ishta, he's not allowed to marry this woman. Says the Gemara, what happens if instead of saying, I was there when the get was signed, he says, I saw your husband Reuven fall off a cliff. He's dead. Now, just quick primer in Hilchas Aguna. We generally try to find as many kulas as possible to allow a woman to get remarried, right? Now, we're not just going to let her get remarried without having some reliance that we know that the guy died. We rely on things if he goes to war and different things. There are scenarios where if someone comes, normally you need to aid them to establish something in halacha.
Later on in the Gemara.
Yeah, we're going to get to it. So, but we will rely on one aid. We will rely on one aid under certain circumstances, and the reason is because we're makel. We try to be as makel as possible when it comes to allowing a woman to get remarried.
You just said the case with the husband died, and you don't need to get anymore, do you?
Nope.
No. So yes, it's two separate cases. So let's say a guy, same guy. We'll say Joe. Instead of coming and saying, "Here's the get," he says, "Yeah, I saw Reuven. He fell off a cliff. He got hit by a bus. He's dead." So now all of a sudden she's mutter to get married. So isn't it the same thing? So says the Mishnah, yeah. Mace. What about not only that? Haragtiv, I killed him. I mean, not only is he dead, but I was the one who caused him to be dead. Harginuhu, or I was part of a group of bandits, and we all sort of just wailed on him until he died. Either way, in all three of these scenarios, the bottom line is the consequence is he's no longer alive, and you're free to get married. So the halacha is, it seems that she can get married. However, lo yisa es ishta, he can't marry her. Same halacha like by get. Meaning, we'll rely on his edus to say that they're mutter, that she's mutter, but not to him. Rabbi Yehuda argues. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Rabbi Yehuda Omer haragtiv. I agree with you if he says mace, and I agree with you if he says harginuhu. It seems, but haragtiv, if he himself says I killed her, then lo sinase isha. Not only can he not marry her, she can't marry anyone. Meaning, the edus of such a person saying that he himself was the murderer is not a reliable edus at all. Meaning, we will not rely on it to allow her to marry anybody.
Why given who is?
Well, Gemara is going to explain the difference why Harginuhu is, meaning if he's part of, what's the difference if he's a murderer as part of a group, if he's a murderer, right? Harginuhu tinasi ishtay.
No person can make himself a Russian.
That's the Gemara is going to talk about that, but Harginuhu, just to I'll let the cat out the bag, the Gemara is going to explain that Harginuhu doesn't actually mean he was killing, it just means he was there when it happened. So really, it's no different than the case of mace. But the Gemara is going to have a reason why it's using the case of Harginuhu. Either way, so just quick summary of the Mishnah. There's a machlekes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to the case of a murderer who says, I murdered your husband. Do we allow you to marry? So the Chachamim say, we believe you, she can marry anyone else, but you, she cannot. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, in that specific case, even other people we're not going to trust. And then everyone, it seems, agrees by the get case that if he's the one who is relying on for Gittin, then the halach is going to be that he can't marry, although we will rely on him to allow the get to work. Okay, says the Gemara. Time in the Medina Sayyam. What's the reason why in the Mishnah when a person comes from Chutz La'aretz and says that the get was done in front of me and therefore it's Lishma? The reason why it's a problem is because since we're so relying on his words, there is so much power in his words, we have to be concerned that maybe he's lying for his own benefit. So therefore, Da'alek Kasamchina, we're relying on him, and therefore we don't allow him to marry her. Aval Me'eretz Yisrael, where there is no concern for him saying Lishma, and so therefore he's not really playing much of a role other than sort of transporting the get. The Lavalei Kasamchinan, Yiseh Ishta. It seems there would be a good diak in the Mishnah that it's specifically when you're coming from Chutz La'aretz, you're not allowed to marry. But if it's within Eretz Yisrael, or really, it's really, I think, making the point more, if we're not relying on you for Lishma, then the halacha should be you'd be allowed to marry her. That seems to be a good deal, because otherwise, why is the Mishnah setting itself up as a case where guys are arriving from all the way out there? Why not just set up a case in Yerushalayim itself? So the Gemara says, okay, so what's that mean? That means that the distinction in the Mishnah is how much are we relying on your words or not? The more we're relying on your words, the more of a reason we have to say that you shouldn't be allowed to marry the woman who you are now saying she's allowed to get married. Says the Gemara, but the problem is, if you continue in the Rabbanan, what does it say? V'ham meis, the case where he comes and says, I saw him get hit by a bus, where over there, what did we say? We said the halacha as well is that she's mutter to get married to anyone else, but not to him. The lavalei kasavchinan, we're not really relying on his words. Why? Because when we're talking about a case of an aguna, really, the marmar isha daiku mitzvah. The Gemara actually is going to speak out two different reasons. The Gemara is only quoting one of them here. When we allow an aguna to get married based on the words of another person, we'll even say a woman's okay. We'll say a man's okay. We'll say one person's okay. And why is that? Because we're not even really relying on their words. We rely on the idea that, although I don't know how far this would go nowadays, but in the times of the Gemara, the assumption was that a woman would not want to put herself under all of the knossos that would come to her if there's fines and stuff that would come to her if she would play this game. If she would say, yeah, I think I saw him dead. I saw him fall down a flight of stairs. I just don't know where he went. Whatever the circumstances are, we basically say that a woman will normally be very, very thorough in her research to make sure her husband's truly dead. So if someone comes along and just substantiates that he's dead, that's enough. So we're not really, really relying on the aid. The aid is just telling us the piece of information that the woman has been saying all along. It's not like an aidus like that would be a normal aidus. It's like a lighter level. Again, we are relying him on some level, just like we're relying on the person bringing the get from Yerushalayim, but not to the point where it's entirely predicated on him. And so therefore, says the Gemara, Ukitani lo yiseh ishtai. So what's the question? You see clearly that even when we're not truly relying on the Eidos, we're going to say he's not allowed to marry. So why would a get from Eretz Yisrael be okay? L'chorah, it's the same thing. Again, where it's talking about where the aid isn't really truly the reason why the get's happening or the mis is happening. So Gemara says like this. No, there's a difference. Hasam, when you're talking about a case where you're talking about misa, it's leka kasva. There's no actual get that he's holding. He's coming and he's saying words. So even though you're right, we're not truly relying on him, but to the extent that we're relying on him, we are relying on him and him alone, meaning there's no document with other Adam signed on it to prove that someone died. It's not like he's coming with a video camera and saying, look, see that's the bus, that's his car, he got shot, he got hit, whatever. However, Hacha, by the case of Gittin, Ika Kasva, he's holding a get in his hands. The get's written by two Adam, it's signed. That already speaks volumes. So all he's really doing is he's saying, here's the get. So in Echanami over there, the Allah is going to be that there's a distinction by get that we're really truly not relying on him, and so therefore from Eretz Yisrael it's going to be okay for him to marry her. And that's the Tanan, like it says in the Mishnah, Ban Bein Gate Lemisa Shaksav Mechia, which is discussion in Hilchos Gittin. There are certain women, like the mother-in-law, certain women that it's problematic relationships, like there's inherent problems, like let's say they're tsaros or it's a mother-in-law, different cases where we won't rely on their edus to say that he died because maybe she's for some reason trying to create problems. We don't rely on her. Masha Ein Kain, when you're talking about if you have one aid, even a mother-in-law saying, here's the get, and b'fanei neftam, we will rely on her. Meaning the edus of b'fanei neftam with a get is the weakest form of edus. And so therefore from Eretz Yisrael, it'll be okay. Masha Ein Kain, if you're saying that he's dead, then that's not going to rely. Okay, take a breath. So what did it say in the Mishnah? It said in the Mishnah that there was a machlekes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda that if someone claims that he murdered the husband, the Chachamim say we'll rely on the edus, but we will not allow him to marry her. And Rabbi Yehuda says no, we will not rely on the edus. Says the Gemara, Meisa Raktiv Yerkenu Lo Yisa Sishtei. What does it say? Hu nihu de lo yisa esishtei ha'achar liktinase. So the Chachamim are saying that we will rely on the edus of him saying that he's a murderer, right? Even though he's a rasha. This is the chiddush of the Gemara. V'hamer Rav Yosef, ploini Ravani lo insi. Let's say a man says, a man was raped me, right? A man sodomized me against my will. So now, a person who does mishkav zachar is chayav misa. He's a rasha, yeah? So if a man says that this other man is a rasha, so he is saying, I didn't partake willingly, so therefore he's a kosher aid. He didn't establish himself as having done anything wrong. He was unfortunately taken advantage of. But the person who was ma'anas him, the person who forced himself on him, that man, disgusting man that he is, not only is he disgusting for mishkav zachar, but it's an aveira. He's chayav misa. He's a rasha. So now the halach is chayav misa. So says Rav Yosef, who the person who was raped, the acher, and another person mitzdarfen lahargai. They could both be edim. They could both be witnesses saying this person did it. Meaning, let's say someone noticed, someone saw it happen. Now you have two edim who could establish that the person who raped should be chayav misa. Now, why is this a chiddush? Because we don't say that since he partook in this, since he was raped, it's not considered like he willingly partook. Therefore, he's not a rasha, because the halacha is a rasha's pasal edus. A person who's a rasha, a person who's a gazlan, a person who steals money from people is pasal edus. Why? Because he's a rasha, and we'll see in a second that a person is not allowed to be a rasha. However, so says Rabbi Yosef, l'rtzoini. If he says, person says, this man had mishkav zachar with me, and he says, and I was not raped. It was a willing thing. In such a scenario, says Rav Yosef, Rashahu, then he's acknowledging that he himself is also a Rasha. And the halach is, the Torah says you can't rely on the edus of a Rasha. We believe him that he's a Rasha, and therefore now we can't use his edus along with someone else to say that the person who he was with is going to be chayav misa. Adarabah, he's chayav misa if there's two other edim. But he certainly can't be an aid. Why? Because he's a Rasha. So again, let's just get the facts of the case. What did Rav Yosef say? If the man raped, we'll say Reuven raped Shimon. If Reuven raped Shimon, then Shimon is an unwilling participant. He's not a rasha, so then he's a kosher aid. Shimon can combine with Levi to say, hey, this is about Reuven and kill him. Whereas if Shimon was a willing participant, then he's just as bad as Reuven. If he's just as bad as Reuven, then he's a rasha. If he's a rasha, well, the halach is a rasha's pasal eidos, so he can't be mitzdaref with Levi or anyone else for that matter to say eidos. So that's the statement of Rav Yosef, and that's a problem in our Mishnah. Why? Because what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah seems to say that if someone comes in and says, I killed this woman's husband, the halacha is that although we won't let him marry, maybe because of we don't want to reward his, we have to be concerned that maybe he's doing it for his own personal incentive to marry her, we will allow anyone else to marry her, which means we do rely on it despite the fact that he's a rasha. So l'chayra, our Mishnah is not like Rav Yosef. Now you might say, who cares? Rav Yosef is not an Amayra. It seems this statement of Rav Yosef is something that we generally don't want to argue with. It seems like it's a strong idea. The idea of a rasha being a pasal aid, no one argues with it, it seems. So if that's the case, how could it be? Gemara is really just asking in a little bit of a convoluted way, how come we're going to rely on this guy's aidus? Isn't he a rasha? He's a self-proclaimed rasha. Rasha's pasal aidus.
He wasn't willing to participate.
Exactly. So says the Gemara, v'chitema maybe geshmak teretz. Shani edus isha dekila b'rabban, and we already see that the threshold of reliance on edus by being matter a woman is very low. We don't require two edim, we require one aid. Not only that, it could be a woman. Not only that, it could even be a karav. It doesn't make a difference. We rely on a very, very low level of testimony when we're talking about allowing a woman to get remarried after her husband dies. So maybe we'll say that although in normal scenarios, I don't know, a case where a person does mishkav zachar, there we're not looking to find reasons to believe this guy. He's a rasha. Of course he's going to be a pasal aid. But in the case of our Mishnah, maybe you'll say that there, even a rasha, we can rely on it. So says the Gemara, no, that can't be. Because the Reb Menashe said the following as we flipped over, Gazlan de Divrayim Koshel Eidos Isha. He says a separate halacha. A person who's a Gazlan de Divrayim, meaning to say he's midarabanan considered a Gazlan. What's a classic example of a midarabanan Gazlan? Gazlan is a thief. What's a Drabanan Gazlan?
It's in public, right?
Gazlan and Ganav is a distinction between public and private. But here we're talking about even in public there are Drabanans and Deraisas. What's a Drabanan Gazlan? Classic example is a person who's Masachik Pekuvia. That's the classic example. Gambling. A gambler, very specific gambling. It's a very interesting sugya of gambling, whether you're really truly puzzled or not. Does it have to be that you do it? Does it have to be that you do it?
Dice?
Literally means dice player, yeah. You have to make sure that he's Misachik B'Kuvi not as a recreation versus a Smach. There's other reasons, whatever. Different reasons that's discussed, but it would only be a Psul M'Derabanan. You're only going to be Psul M'Derabanan. It's only a Gazan Derabanan, and therefore, says Rabbi Menashe, such a person is kosher le'edus isha, meaning although in other areas they're not kosher, but this type of a problem for edus isha would be okay, but only if you're a Gazan Derabanan. Gazan de Divrei Torah, let's say you went and shoved armed robbery, that's a different story. Then you're a Gazan Deraisa, Pasal Edus Isha, we won't rely on it. So your attempt to try to say that maybe Edus Isha is unique and we're going to lighten the requirements on Edus and allow a Rasha to testify is not the case. So the question comes back. What we're effectively saying is, between Rav Menashe and Rav Yosef, we basically have the following statement. Clearly, when a person's a Rasha, he's not believed. Not only is he not believed, he's not believed even for Edus Isha, which means, how do you say in the Mishnah that a person says, hi, I murdered your husband, we're going to allow her to marry to someone else? He's claiming he's a Rasha. If he's a Rasha, so says the Gemara, Amr Lacha Rav Menashe, first answers the Gemara, name a Rav Menashe the Amik Rav Yehuda. Says the Gemara, maybe you're right. Maybe Rav Menashe, who's saying that Edus Isha has a higher threshold, and that you can't say a Rasha is allowed to testify, maybe he only holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Because what did Rabbi Yehuda said? Rabbi Yehuda said that if the guy says, I murdered him, he's not believed even for other people. Maybe you'll say that the Pshat and Rabbi Yehuda is exactly like Rav Menashe. Why? Because he's a Rasha, and a Rasha can't be trusted. So the Gemara says, no, Amr Lacha Rav Menashe, don't shtup me into only one Tana. I want to go with both Tanas. He says, I, who say that the Edus Isha of a Rasha is not going to be accepted if it's a Rasha Deraisa, I can even work like the Rabbanan who say in this scenario we will rely on it. How could it be? If I'm saying I murdered someone, I'm a Rasha. Says the Gemara, a very lumdish sugya that really shows up in Ksubis and in other places. But time of the Rabbanan, what's the pshat in the Rabbanan? Why did the Rabbanan say, well, we're going to believe this guy despite the fact that he's calling himself a Rasha? Time of the Rabbanan hacha is a Kiderava. The Amar Rava, Ksubis Yitches Mit Beis, Yismach sugya. Adam Karvetz Latzmai. Just like Reuven is not allowed to testify about Shimon and his brother because they're relatives, well, you're a relative of yourself. You're not believed to say Edus about yourself. So when you say the words, I murdered, what should we call it? I murdered Reuven. So we say like this. We don't believe the fact that you're a Rasha.
The woman's dead.
So says the Gemara, Ve'ena the Mesim Atzmei Rasha. So since I'm not believed about myself because Eina the Mesim Atzmei Rasha, I'm not believed to say that I did something wrong. Therefore, the part we say, it's a phrase in the Gemara, we'll see it in Yitches and Mitzvah Shem, is Palgin and Dibura. Palgin and Dibura is a Lamdasha concept. We've had many Lamdasha concepts we've learned together so far. We have many, Breira, Migu, all of these different things. Well, this is another classic Lamdasha idea. This is the beauty of the Torah. Whenever I think of these types of ideas, this is the Torah being Mechadesh ideas. It's one thing for us to have conversations about your wife, acting suspicious. That's the Torah applying its halachas to a world scenario that everyone exists with. Palgin and Dibura is an entirely 100% halachic concept. What it means is as follows. The words literally means Palginan. We split Dibura, your words. Meaning, you said the words, I killed Reuven. And in those words, what does that mean? You're saying two things. Reuven's dead. Why? I made him dead. So what we say is, we split your words and say, the part where you're saying that Reuven's dead, we believe. The part where we say that you're the one who made him dead, we don't believe. Why? Because that part you're not believed on, because in that you're a Karav. But you're not a Karav to Reuven. You're allowed to say that he's not alive anymore. So interestingly, despite the fact that in this Eidos, you're effectively saying you're a Rasha, the part where you're saying you're a Rasha, we ignore. It's like we don't even hear it. The part where you're saying he's dead, we do trust, and therefore the halacha is that she's allowed to get married to someone else. And so therefore says Rav Menashe, I'll even say like the Rabbana, even though I hold that a Rasha is not good la'edus isha, this guy's not a Rasha because we don't believe him when he says he's a Rasha. It's not like someone else is saying that he's a Rasha. That's Rav Menashe. Says the Gemara, okay, fine. So if Rav Menashe is not going like Rav Yehuda alone, he's going like everyone, so we still have a kasha, right? What about Rav Yosef? L'chura Rav Yosef and our Mishnah can't go together. Says the Gemara, Lema Rav Yosef to Amar Rav Yehuda. He can't go like our Mishnah, like the Chachamim. Again, just to speak it out, Rav Yosef holds that person says that the man raped me, then I could be a good aid. But he says, what if a person says I was a willing partner? It says over there, then he's a puzzle aid. Meaning he clearly has no problem saying that a person can make themselves a Rasha. In fact, he says that since he said he did it willingly, he is a Rasha and he's not a good aid. That can't work with the Rabbanan. That's got to be Rav Yosef. Because Rav Yosef's the one who says in our Mishnah that a woman is not going to be allowed to marry anyone if the Eidos is about the fact that Reuven murdered her husband. So the Gemara says, no. Because Amar Lacha Rav Yosef, Ana Damri Afilu Rabbanon, I can work within the Rabbanon. How? For the same reason we wanted to say before in the Vechitema. V'shani Edus Isha Dekila Barabbanon. Meaning, yes, Einachanami, normally I say that a person makes himself a Rasha, he's Pasal Edus to, let's say, for instance, kill the other person who raped him. But when you're talking about being matter related to get married to someone else, there, even if we believe him that he's a Rasha is going to be kosher for that type of Edus, meaning apparently not like Rav Menashe. And according to Rav Yosef, he'll have to say Rav Menashe Damar Rav Yehuda, because according to him, the only way this works is if
I'll get into the wrong.
no, it's a different thing. The only way this works is if Rav Menashe, who said that the halacha is that the edus of an isha is going to not work if you're a Rasha, that only works in the Rabban in Rav Yehuda, but lo'olam in the Rabbanon were makel to say. So it comes out according to Rav Yosef that the machlokas between the Chachamim and Rav Yehuda is gufa whether you hold of Rav Menashe or not. If you hold of Rav Menashe that the being a Rasha makes you pasal edus isha, that'll be Rav Yehuda, and the Chachamim hold no, that edus isha is makel and will even allow a Rasha. That's the way Rav Yosef will understand the machlekes. Rav Menashe will understand the machlekes, that the machlekes is whether we say pagina dibura or not. Meaning, according to the Chachamim, we say Eina de Mesa Matzmei Rasha, and since Eina de Mesa Matzmei Rasha, it's pagina dibura. And Rabbi Yehuda says no, and therefore since you can't say pagina dibura and Eina de Mesa Matzmei Rasha, we can't rely on the edus at all, and therefore she can't marry anybody. There's two different ways to understand the machlekes. Okay, continues the Gemara. The last case in the Mishnah was haraktiv. So it brought these two cases. One is where I say I murdered, and the other one is where I say I murdered along with other people. Really, there's no difference. Like the rabbi asked, they sound like they're the same thing. Rav Yehuda says, it says, no. I didn't murder. I was with a group of guys, and all of a sudden we were hanging out having beers, and all of a sudden they went crazy and they murdered this guy. And I was there, but I mean, I was part of the group, but I didn't actually partake in the murder. Says the Gemara, Hatanya here is not a question. Here it's a proof. Well, prove that that's obviously what's going on in the Mishnah, that Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah was saying that if a person says, I was part of a group, when it says Harganuhu, it means I was part of a group, I didn't murder. Because it says the following, Amru Loyla Rabbi Yehuda. This is the Chachamim of our Mishnah, arguing with Rabbi Yehuda to try to bring proof. Right? What do they say? There was a story where there were a bunch of bandits all hanging out, drinking beers after a night of gallivanting and stealing and doing all the stuff they did. And they had caught him, and they were going to string him up and murder him, meaning to say they caught this guy, he was part of this group, and he was sentenced to death. And where did it happen? In Gizas Kaputkia, in a certain place in Kaputkia, which was a city in somewhere in Babel. And he, the person realizing he's about to get, thrown over the bridge over here, said the following: L'chu, quickly run. Amru la le'esha Shimon Baskayin. Go find Shimon Baskayin. Why? And tell her, Ani haraktiv es baila bichni sasi lalud. I killed her husband when I came into the city of Lud. Or some say that it was when he was entering Lud. But regardless, he says, I murdered her husband. Meaning, he knows this woman who's been in Aguna for many, many years. No one knows where her husband is, but she hasn't been able to get remarried. He, in his last-ditch effort, before he's being thrown off a bridge, is like, you know what? I was the one who murdered the husband, so maybe go be mad to the Aguna. And in that story, they relied on his words. So says the Gemara, says the Chachamim to Rabbi Yehuda, you see that we rely on a person's words when he says, I murdered someone. They tried to bring a proof from this story. So what was Rabbi Yehuda's response? Amar Lehem, Rabbi Yehuda said back to them, not a raya, misham raya, but oimerani ayisim hargav. That case there is not talking about where he actually was the one saying, I murdered. He's saying, I was with a group of people and I saw them murder him. But I was just sort of part of we burgled together, we stole together, but I wasn't a murderer, right? So what do you see? You see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda argues by her the reason, the distinction he makes between I killed versus I was with a group that killed is exactly like we just said. Says the Gemara, 1 second. How could that be? You're telling me he's not a Russian? This guy's a Russian. Vaha listim kitani. The story it says that he was part of this group. He says, yeah, no problem. Either they grabbed him, they kidnapped him, or he got caught up with a bad crowd. That doesn't mean that he necessarily partook in the murder. Says the Gemara, Vaha yotzel lahara kitani. But what do you mean? If they're going to kill him, the Bezdin is going to kill him. Obviously, he did something wrong. Gemara says no. We're talking about a Gaisha court. It's like a Putin kangaroo court. They're not really looking to find out what happened. Rather, the Leidaiki Vikatli, they're going to go murder. I think this guy was the one who was over there. You're wearing the red shirt, and therefore there was you killed. There was a one-armed man in my house, and there's a fugitive reference. And if you got it, you got it. You didn't. So we can hold here, but really, I don't mind just trying to quickly run to this mission here. Yeah, fantastic.
I've watched it
100 times. Yeah,
100 times.
The fugitive. Oh my gosh, yeah. Harrison Ford, one-armed man. Oh my gosh. Dr. Specter,
Yes.
Lecter, whatever.
I
Okay.
watched that movie 100
Oh, such a good movie.
times.
Either way, says the Mishnah.
When I was a kid, I told my kids to watched it.
Oh, so good.
Amazing.
Yeah. Tommy Lee Jones. Oh,
It's the best thing. You know that's how they know they make the river green.
Yeah.
St. Patty's
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Boston, right? When he walks
I
out.
learned from that movie.
Yeah.
That Goyim have no clue what good scotch is. I remember the cop gets up and he says, "Anyone who gets me information, there's going to be a free 10-year-old bottle of scotch."
Right.
Ugh.
When he
Goyim don't know the liquor.
Boston cops.
Yeah, exactly right.
All right,
So it says the new Mishnah. Mishnah continues a very similar idea. It says in the Mishnah, "Chacham she'aser es ha'isha b'neder al baila." Let's just quickly regroup here. We're still discussing the halachas of who can be trusted to say that a man's wife is going to be mutter. Maybe we're concerned that the only reason why he's doing it is in order for him, right? Says the Mishnah, Chacham. Let's say you have a Talmud Chacham. He's on a bezdin. Maybe he's by himself. She'aser es ha'isha b'neder al baila. So a man and a woman makes a neder. We know the halach is he could be matir neder. So he comes in front of this man, that comes in front of this Chacham, to try to be matir the neder. The husband wants her to be matir it in order to stay married, because he doesn't want to stay married to her if he does not matter the neder. So she goes to try to be matter the neder, and all of a sudden the Chacham says, "Sorry, you do not have the requirements needed to be able to be matter this neder. The neder stays in place," which means now the husband's going to divorce her. And maybe the Chacham is saying that in order because he saw her, she's a very pretty lady. So he's maybe after he divorces her, I can pick up a new wife. So it says over there, Harezil, you said he's not allowed to marry. However, miyana, let's say she did miyan, meaning let's say it's a case where it's a ktana, and the ktana comes in front of him, in front of the husband, and says, "I don't want to marry this person." It's before the age of 12, or shechaltza b'fanav, or it's a scenario of yibum, and the brother died, and now the wife is coming with the brother, and they're doing chalitza, and over here he's partaking he's on the bezdin. So it says over here, Yisana, now even though he partook in this woman becoming free to get married to someone else, because again, after chalitza and after me, and she's mutter to marry. Says over here, Mipnei Shehu Bezdin, the difference is because he's really a member of a Bezdin. Rashi speaks it out very obvious. In the first case, we're talking about he's on his own. And in the second case, we're talking about he's got two other people. I mean, the whole concern is that he's going to lie. Well, you can't really lie if you have two other people you got to convince. Whereas if you're on your own and you're being matter the neder, maybe we're concerned you're not being matter the neder. No. Says the Gemara, what do you see? You're only usher to marry her if you keep them together. Ha, hitira, let's say you were matter the neder, meaning you allowed them to stay married. Yisa'ena, then the halacha would be that if he should subsequently get divorced, that he can go ahead and marry her, because the fact that you were on the case does not, by definition, remove you from ever marrying this woman. It's only that if you keep them apart, now you're forcing her to be free. Now we're going to say that perhaps we can't trust what you did, and maybe the reason why you're doing this is in order for that reason, so we don't want to allow you to marry. And again, it's not. We can ask the same question over here. And what happens if he went ahead and married her? Are we going to divorce her? It seems like it's a discussion that we can have. We'll see at the end of the Gemara. So says Gemara b'mayaskina. What are we talking about over here exactly? In the beginning of the Mishnah, are we talking about where he's alone doing this? That can't be. Chad mimatzi matir. Can a person be matir and ender on his own? We do it every year, Rosh Hashanah. We got to grab three guys. Hataras Adarim, right? Va'amar Reb Chia bar Av and Amar Rav Amram. Tana Hataras and Nedar b'Shlosho. It's got to be in front of three people. So obviously the Reish is also talking about three. So really, what's the difference in the Reish and the Seifa? Vela betlasa, it's talking about three. Michshidi, can a person be chayshish? I'll prove to you not, because the Mishnah says in the Seifa. V'hatnan miyanoi shechaltz b'fanav yisan mipnei shum bezdin. So which one is it? If you're part of a bezdin and you can't be, we're not nervous that you're going to lie, then l'chora the halacha should be in the Reish also that you're not going to lie. You should be allowed to marry her. Elamai, we are choshish for you that you're going to be part of a bezdin and lie. Well, then even in the last case of miyon and chalitza, we shouldn't trust you. Moshe says la'olam no. Loilam bechad, and it's probably what you were thinking already. Ukida Amar Chizda Amar Rav Yochanan biyachid mumchak. The halacha is you could do hataras nadarim without a bezdin as long as the person you're doing in front of is a big Talmud Chacham. So hachanami biyachid mumcha. And what we're really basically saying is even the yachid mumcha, even this great Talmud Chacham, this big tzaddik who knows all the halachas and can even be a bezdin all by himself, he's choshed, he's a choshed, and therefore he's not allowed to marry this woman if he's the one who kills the hataras nadarim, but rather keeps the neder in place. Continues the Gemara, miyanoi shechaltza. It said in the Mishnah in the end that if you do miyan or you do chalitza, there the halacha is even though you're matter her to marry other people, you're allowed to marry her because it's a bezdin. It says the Gemara, time of the bezdin. It's mashma that if it's because we'll say that it's a bezdin of three, betray. But let's say it would just be two people, then the halacha would be loy. The halacha would be we don't allow you to marry. We're concerned that with two people, that's already easy to convince one other guy. Hey, I'm pretty sure that we shouldn't be and we shouldn't allow this. We should allow this mian. It's another guy. It's no problem. So says the Gemara, Maishna meha. But how is that any different than the following? The Mishnah says, the Tanan, and also in Gittin, Eidim achsum al sdei mekach. You have two Eidim that are signed onto a transaction, a land transaction. Ve'al get isha, that's what we need. And two Eidim signed on a shtar, a get, that is used to allow a woman to go marry someone else. And now all of a sudden, the Edom that are in that shtar, it says over here, Lo choshu chachamim ledavar. You see that those two Edom are allowed to marry the woman. Meaning we don't say that since this get is predicated on their witness, their testimony written into the get, we don't say, well, since one of them are signed onto the get, we have to be concerned that maybe he only signed because really he's looking to marry this woman. We don't say that. So you see over there, when you have two people, one of them is allowed to marry her. So then how come in our Mishnah, it would be that it would be a problem? Because what we're saying is the only reason why it's mutter is because you're on a bezdin of three. So the Gemara says, Zehi gufa kamashmalan. No, that's gufa the chiddush over here. When we're talking about miyun, or chalitza is lafuki b'man amar miyun b'fnei shnayim. There's an opinion who holds that miyun does not need to be done in front of three people. It can be done in front of two people. And gufa, that's the chiddush of our Mishnah, that when you have a miyun must be done in front of three and not in front of two. And so therefore, the diak in the Mishnah of three is no chashash because it's a bezdin. Meaning in Ein Chanami, with two there's no chashash either. It's just that the chiddush of our Mishnah is gufa teaching me three to teach me the halacha that miyun is with three and not with two. Kamash Malah and miyun begimel. Ibayil who asked the Gemara, Konos Mahu Shiyotzi. What about in this case? The Chacham, who wasn't matter the nether, he kept the nether in place, and now she subsequently got divorced. Is he allowed to marry her? Says the Mishnah, no. Not allowed to marry her. Right? The Chacham, by himself, when he's on his own.
Allowed the marriage.
If he allowed. What about if he stopped it? He kept the nether in place, he wasn't matter the nether, and then they subsequently got divorced. And now, he's not allowed to marry her. So ask the Gemara, the same question we've seen already repetitive over here. What's the halacha? Mahu shiyotzi. What happens if he went ahead and blew through the rabbi's warning and said, I'm going to marry her anyways? This chacham mumche, whatever he is, he's a person who, yachid mumche, he went ahead and married her. Do we force them to get divorced? Meaning, l'chura, it's only an isdiraban, and maybe it will say it's like our Mishnah, and the halacha is he's got to get divorced. Or no, maybe it will say it's like the Gemara we saw in Amud Aleph, where it's talking about a man marries a woman with a rumor, and now he decides to marry her after, and he did a beiser, where we don't say he's got to get divorced. Rav Kahana Amar Kanas Maitzi, this is a machlekes. This is like a middling ground. Rav Kahana Amar Kanas Maitzi, if you went ahead did the Aveira, Allah is we're going to have to force him to get divorced. Rav Ashi Amar Kanas Einu Maitzi, that no, you're not Maitzi. Tani Lahu Rav Zuti Debeira Papi Kedivra Amar Kanas Einu Maitzi. He learned also like the opinion who holds that you're not Maitzi the person's holiness the Rabbanon. Amulei Rabbanon le Rav Ashi, and they said to Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi again is the one who says that you leave them to stay together. So they said to Rav Ashi, Gemara or Svara? Do you learn this as a Svara, or did you have this in tradition that this is what we do, that we don't force them to get divorced? Amr Lahu, what do you mean? It's a Masnisani, it's our Mishnah. Hanita Mishifcha Vinishtachara, a person who were suspicious, he suspected that he was with a woman who was a shifcha, a guy, that the halacha is, you see that when a person is over, there's an Isdaraban, he's not allowed to marry such a woman, but if he married her, the halacha is he doesn't have to divorce her. So what do you see? Alma, a rumor is not enough to force someone to divorce, it's only enough to prevent them from getting married. So to a chanami, what's the reason why it's only out of a concern of a renana? Rashi says, mipnei rinun, la'az b'nei adam. The discussions of people, b'renana lai mafkinon. We'll pause here. We'll pick up from here tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. Short daf.
On time, right?
Tomorrow?
No, that's that's the new Mishnah. But we did it already. We did this already. If you want, I'll try to write it up on the board and we'll have it for tomorrow. It's not that complicated.
Didn't we say we have to start on time tomorrow?
Yes, we definitely have to start on that.
Hello.